Hello and welcome to Light Body Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Lara May, and today on Wellness Illuminated, we are going to be talking about nervous system peptides, so brain signaling and the biology of deep restoration, specifically with DSIP. So, if you've been following us in this series, you've probably started to notice a pattern here. It's a good pattern. We keep coming back to the same idea. The body does not heal when it's being pushed too hard. It heals when it feels safe enough to repair. And nowhere is that more true than the nervous system, because the nervous system is not just one system among many. It is the master regulator. It is the master regulator of our sleep, of stress response, of inflammation, of hormone signaling, and ultimately healing capacity. So today we're talking about a category of peptides that really doesn't get that much of attention, but it should. But these are the nervous system peptides, specifically DSIP, and this broader concept of neuroregulatory signaling. So we're going to unpack this through a lens that, of course, is physiological, clinically grounded, and deeply relevant to how people actually feel day to day. So, why the nervous system comes first? Before we even talk about peptides, we need to establish something very clearly. If the nervous system is dysregulated, then nothing else really in your body is going to be working optimally. Not your metabolism, not your hormones, not all of your inflammatory pathways, which ultimately are your healing pathways, your immune system, any of those things. Because when the body is in a chronic state of stress, cortisol remains elevated and/or it's dysregulated. Sympathetic activity dominates. Parasympathetic tone is reduced. So we're talking about fight or flight here, right? And that shifts physiology toward survival, not repair. From a pathophysiology standpoint, this means that blood flow is redirected away from digestion and healing. Sorry, I have cat hair in my face. Inflammatory signaling becomes altered, mitochondrial efficiency declines, and sleep architecture is disrupted. So even if you introduce the right supplements, the right peptides, the right protocols, if the nervous system is not regulated, then the body may not respond fully or correctly or exactly how you want it. So let's talk about DSIP. DSIP stands for Delta Sleep-Inducing Peptide. It was originally identified in the context of sleep regulation, specifically deep delta wave sleep. But now we understand that DSIP is not just about sleep. It also appears to influence circadian rhythm regulation, stress response, neuroendocrine signaling, and possibly even pain modulation. So DSIP interacts with the brain at multiple levels, including the hypothalamus, the limbic system, and pathways involved in stress and recovery. So functionally, it seems to help the body by shifting us into a state where restoration is possible. If you remember in the last episode that we talked about the different phases of healing. And so we have that inflammation phase, and then we have the restoration phase, and then the remodeling phase. So the DSIP helps shift us into the state where the restoration is possible. All right. So let's zoom in on sleep. Not all sleep is the same sleep. I'm sure you know that. That's not earth-shattering news to anyone, because we know how we feel after a crappy night's sleep or a really good night's sleep. But deep sleep, also known as the slow wave or the delta sleep, is where growth hormone is released, tissue repair occurs, immune modulation happens, and the brain clears that metabolic waste. So if someone is falling asleep but not staying asleep, or waking up frequently, or not reaching that deep sleep phase, then the body is missing out on its primary repair window. So this is actually really important. So DSIP appears to support deeper sleep cycles, improved sleep continuity, and more efficient transition into restorative phases. So here's the key. It doesn't sedate the brain, so you don't get that hungover feeling like you might if you take certain sleep supplements. It supports the body's ability to enter the deep sleep naturally. So that this is a very different mechanism than your typical valerian root or melatonin or theanine, any of those sleep supplements. So now let's talk about stress and our good friend, the HPA axis and cortisol. So if you remember from another previous episode, we did a pretty good deep dive into the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It regulates cortisol production, circadian rhythm, and stress adaptation. In chronic stress, we often see elevated nighttime cortisol, flattened diurnal rhythms, meaning, we talked about that morning waking peak in your cortisol that's normal and good. But a lot of times, if you have this dysregulation with your cortisol, you don't get that. And so that's when we see the flattened line. So this flattened rhythm or just inconsistent signaling in general. This disrupts your sleep. Then therefore it disrupts your recovery and your hormone balance. So DSIP appears to influence the system by modulating the stress signaling pathways and potentially reducing this hyperactivation of the HPA axis and supports a more balanced circadian rhythm. So instead of forcing sleep, it helps regulate the system that allows sleep to happen. So now let's bring this back to inflammation. So the nervous system and the immune system are deeply linked. We know that. With chronic stress, again, we have the increased inflammatory signaling, we have the elevated cytokines, and the impaired resolution pathways. When the parasympathetic tone improves, our inflammation decreases, our immune system becomes more regulated, and the healing capacity increases. So peptides that support nervous system regulation, like DSIP, can indirectly reduce inflammation, improve recovery, and enhance healing across systems by providing that opportunity for our brain to get into that deep delta sleep. So who might this actually be beneficial for? So this category of peptides can be especially helpful for people who are, moving through burnout, struggling with burnout, chronically stressed, struggling with sleep quality, especially if you feel like you're one of these people that never gets a good night's sleep. If you find yourself waking up between 2 and 4 a.m. consistently, if you are dealing with other levels of nervous system dysregulation, if you feel wired but tired, again, we talked about that as being a direct reflection of cortisol dysregulation. And if you're experiencing poor recovery despite doing everything quote unquote right, then DSIP could be a tool to add to your toolbox because all of these things are illustrative of a dysregulated picture. And so let's talk more about, again, like where does the peptide fit in? So context matters, of course, and always. So DSIP is not a replacement for poor sleep hygiene. Again, you should be shutting off your devices, ideally up to like 2 hours before you plan to go to bed, cutting off caffeine at least 6 hours before you plan to go to sleep, really watching what and how you're eating later in the day. If you're an intermittent faster, that's why some people choose to have your meals in the earlier part of the day because they find that they actually sleep better by not eating later. So anyway, sleep hygiene, super important, does not go by the wayside, even if you introduce DSIP. This is also not a fix for extreme lifestyle mismatches or mismanagements. I mean, again, like you want to make sure that you're giving your body enough time to go in and out of the cycle, because that's how our sleep cycles work. Usually we should fall asleep and go pretty quickly into deep delta, and then we'll come out, and then we might go back in, and we're cycling through REM at this, same time. And so, but if you literally aren't giving yourself enough time window, so if you're only getting like 3 to 4 hours, then you're probably not even giving yourself time to have some deep sleep. And so again, like we have to look at root causes here. So this is meant to be a helpful add-on, not a replacement for. So if you're overstimulated at night, you have significant blood sugar instabilities, or you're not creating space for rest, then even the effect of DSIP might be limited, because peptides amplify your system. They don't replace it. So how do we see this in the big picture? So nervous system peptides really are not necessarily about performance, even though we think they would be, but they're about restoration capacity. And so they can help the body downshift when we're like over revving. They can help the body regulate when we are dysregulated. They help us access, and they help our body create space for those deeper healing states. And so when that happens, then everything else falls into a place and improves. So then your metabolism falls into place. Your hormone balance goes back into actual balance. The inflammation is dampened down and resolves, and you actually move into recovery mode. So if there's one thing that I want you to take from this episode, is that healing doesn't happen when you push harder. It happens when the body feels safe enough to repair. And the nervous system is the gateway to that state of safety and repair. So peptides like DSIP can support that shift, but they are part of, again, the big picture of all the tools. They're the just one color in the crayon box. They're not the whole box. And so again, that picture should look like how you live, how you recover, how your body experiences safety. And so from here, in the next episode, we're going to move into another category, and we're going to talk about longevity and mitochondria. And I think a lot of you will get excited about that too, because then that's where we're going to talk about NAD plus, and we'll talk about liver health, and we'll talk about some MOTS-C, and again, like just the power of feeling good and the tools that we can give our body to feel good. But this one, supporting your sleep and allowing your body to get in that deep sleep cycle, is super imperative to, again, creating that space for healing. So I hope that this episode found you well and having a beautiful day, and we will definitely catch you in the next episode.